January 1993. A Jack in the Box restaurant in the Seattle area. A kid's meal, a paper wrapper, a burger cooked the way that chain had always cooked burgers. Ordinary Tuesday food. Within weeks, Washington state health officials were tracing an outbreak of E. coli 0157, H7 that would sicken more than 700 people across 4 states and kill 4 children. The patties weren't spoiled. They didn't smell wrong. They looked exactly like the ones served the year before and the year before that. So here's the question this whole video is built on. If the food that hurts people looks completely normal, what is it exactly that the label is protecting you from? If you like knowing what a label legally means before you trust it, subscribe. Over the next half hour, we're walking through the biggest documented recalls in modern food history, what the official notices actually said, and the pantry rules that came out of them. Let's start with the thing almost nobody thinks about: peanut butter. It's the most boring jar in the house. Shelf-stable, kid-friendly, cheap protein. The emergency food that every prepper list on Earth puts near the top. It's also the product at the center of what remains the most consequential criminal case in American food history. Here's why peanut butter got trusted in the first place. Roasting peanuts hits temperatures that kill pathogens. The finished paste has very little free water, what food scientists call low water activity, and bacteria generally need water to multiply. The numbers are stark. Most peanut butter sits somewhere around 0.2 to 0.3 on that scale, and salmonella needs roughly 0.94 to grow. So for decades, the working assumption across the industry was simple: peanut butter is a kill-step product. It cooks, it dries, it's safe. That assumption is exactly what made the 2008 and 2009 outbreak possible. Because here's the part that gets missed. Salmonella doesn't need to multiply in peanut butter to hurt you. It just needs to survive. And in a high-fat, low-moisture environment, salmonella can persist for months, and in freezer or cupboard conditions, researchers have tracked survival past a year. Fat is protective. It shields the organism from stomach acid too, which means the infectious dose can be dramatically lower than in a watery food, low enough that a smear on a cracker is enough. Dryness also works against the plant. Heat kills bacteria far less efficiently in a dry matrix than a wet one, so the same roast that would sterilize a soup may not finish the job in a paste. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention documented that outbreak across 46 states, with more than 700 confirmed illnesses and 9 deaths linked to products traced back to the Peanut Corporation of America, a company operating out of Blakely, Georgia, with a second facility in Plainview, Texas. Investigators who walked those plants afterward described a roof that leaked, water where it shouldn't be, and gaps in the wall of a building processing a product whose entire safety case depended on staying dry. And this wasn't the first warning. 2 years earlier, a different manufacturer's peanut butter had been recalled after a multi-state salmonella outbreak with hundreds of illnesses, traced to moisture intrusion at the plant. The industry had already been told the assumption was wrong. And notice something about how you buy this stuff. Millions of people bought the finished jar and assumed the brand on the front made the product. Most of the time, that's not how peanut butter works, and it's not how most of the pantry works. PCA didn't sell to you. PCA sold peanut paste and roasted peanuts to other companies, who put it into crackers, cookies, ice cream, energy bars, dog treats, institutional food for schools and nursing homes. The recall eventually touched thousands of individual products across hundreds of companies, one of the largest recall footprints ever recorded in the United States. It ran for months, in waves, because every company that bought the ingredient had to work out which of its own products contained it, and then their customers had to do the same. That's the structural lesson, and it applies to almost every category in your kitchen. The brand you trust is often an assembler. The ingredient you're actually eating came from a supplier you've never heard of, in a plant you can't name, and that supplier may be feeding 40 competing brands at once. When something goes wrong upstream, it doesn't go wrong in one aisle. It goes wrong everywhere simultaneously. It's the reason a single sesame paste, a single spice, a single flour mill can put items in 6 different sections of the same store. So people buy this category wrong in 3 specific ways. First, they treat brand loyalty as a safety strategy. It isn't. It's a quality and consistency strategy, which is worth something, but a national brand and a store brand can be filled on the same line from the same tank. What actually differs between them is specification, testing frequency, supplier auditing, and whether the buyer insists on a test and hold policy, meaning product doesn't ship until results come back clean. None of that appears on the front of the jar. It's also worth knowing that the third-party audits companies rely on are usually announced in advance and paid for by the plant being audited, which is a structural weakness people inside the industry have argued about for years. Second, people assume shelf-stable equals sterile. Shelf-stable means the product won't spoil in a way you'd notice. Rancidity, mold, fermentation, those are spoilage organisms and chemical changes, and your nose is genuinely good at catching them. Pathogens are different. Salmonella, Listeria monocytogenes, E. coli O157, H7 and Shiga toxin-producing relatives produce no smell, no slime, no off-color, no bulge. A contaminated jar smells like peanuts. That is the single most important sentence in this entire video. Third, people throw away the packaging. I do it too, it's clutter. But the lot code stamped near the cap or crimped into the end seal is the only thing that connects your specific jar to a specific production run on a specific day. When a recall notice drops, it almost never says all of this product. It says specific UPCs, specific lot numbers, specific best by dates, and often a list of the states it was distributed to. Without that code, you're guessing, and guessing usually means people throw out safe food and keep unsafe food. If you decant into nice glass containers, and plenty of people do, snip the code off the original package and tape it to the lid. It takes 4 seconds. The reason I'm opening with a jar of peanut butter instead of something dramatic is that the drama is never in the product. It's in the paperwork. It's in a supplier relationship you can't see, a testing policy you'll never read, and a lot code you threw in the recycling. Everything else we cover today is a variation on that theme. Ordinary food, invisible failure, and a label that tells you far less than you assume, but also, if you learn to read it, far more than most people ever get out of it. Now let's do the legal machinery, because the word recall gets thrown around like it means one thing, and it doesn't. Start with who's in charge. In the United States, food oversight is split. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, through its Food Safety and Inspection Service, handles meat, poultry, and certain egg products. The Food and Drug Administration handles essentially everything else, which is roughly 80% of the food supply by most public accountings. That's why a frozen pizza with pepperoni can fall under USDA, while a cheese pizza falls under FDA. It's a genuine seam in the system, and outbreak investigators have complained about it publicly for decades. Second thing to understand, for most of modern history, food recalls in America were voluntary. The FDA did not have general mandatory recall authority over food until the Food Safety Modernization Act, signed in January 2011. Read that again. Before 2011, if a company refused to pull a product, the agency's main tools were publicity, seizure through the courts, and pressure. FSIS, on the meat side, likewise operates a system where the vast majority of recalls are company-initiated, though the agency can suspend inspection, and a plant without inspectors legally cannot ship product. That's the real hammer. Then there are the classes. FDA and FSIS both use a 3-tier system. Class I means a reasonable probability that use will cause serious adverse health consequences or death. That's your listeria in ready-to-eat meat, your undeclared peanut in a cookie, your E. coli O157 in ground beef. Class II means a remote probability of serious harm, or temporary and reversible effects. Class III means a violation that's unlikely to cause harm at all. Think a labeling defect on something harmless. When a headline says, "Massive recall," check the class. A Class III recall of 1 million units matters far less to your body than a Class I recall of 400 cases. Also learn the distinction between a recall, a market withdrawal, and a safety alert. A market withdrawal is for a minor issue that isn't a legal violation, quality problems, a stale batch. A safety alert goes out when the product is still out there in people's homes, and the agency wants the public warned directly. Only the recall itself is the formal removal of violative product from commerce. Now the codes. Undeclared allergens are consistently one of the top causes of food recalls in the United States, year after year. That's not an exotic microbe. That's a label that failed to say milk, or soy, or peanut, or wheat, usually because the wrong film went on the wrong line or a supplier changed a formula quietly. The Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004 set the major allergen declarations, and the FASTER Act of 2021 added sesame as the 9th major allergen in the United States effective January 2023. Sesame is worth flagging because there were widely reported consequences. Some manufacturers responded by intentionally adding sesame to products so they could truthfully label it rather than guarantee segregation, which allergy advocacy groups publicly criticized as the opposite of the law's intent. Here's a loophole worth knowing. Advisory statements, the may contain traces of language, are voluntary in the United States. They're not defined by a legal threshold. A processor can use that phrase generously to protect itself legally or omit it entirely. So the absence of may contain is not proof of absence. Another one, best by, sell by, and use by dates are, for most foods in the United States, not federally regulated at all. Infant formula is the notable exception, where a use by date is required by federal regulation. Everything else is manufacturer quality judgment. The USDA has stated plainly on its own consumer pages that these dates are indicators of quality, not safety. Millions of tons of perfectly good food get discarded every year because people read a quality suggestion as an expiration. And one final piece of plumbing most people have never heard of: the Reportable Food Registry, launched in September 2009. It requires companies to notify FDA within 24 hours when they have reason to believe a food presents a reasonable probability of serious health consequences. It exists because of what we're about to cover in the next act, and its annual reports are public reading if you ever want to see what actually goes wrong, in categories, in numbers. Let's walk the timeline, because modern food law is basically a scar map. Every rule you benefit from was written after somebody got hurt. Go back to 1906. Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, aiming at the working conditions in Chicago's packing houses. He famously said he aimed at the public's heart and hit its stomach instead. That same year, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Federal Meat Inspection Act. Harvey Washington Wiley, the chemist who'd run the Bureau of Chemistry's controversial testing on food preservatives, was the driving force. Those trials began in 1902 with young volunteers from the department eating measured doses of preservatives at what Wiley called the hygienic table. The press renamed them the Poison Squad, and the name stuck because it sold papers. That's the foundation stone. Jump to 1937. A Tennessee company dissolved a sulfa drug in diethylene glycol, essentially an antifreeze compound, and sold it as an elixir. More than 100 people died, many of them children. There was no legal requirement at the time to prove a product was safe before selling it. The response was the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, still the backbone statute today. It's worth pausing on how thin the legal ground had been. Under the old law, the government's strongest complaint was that the word elixir implied alcohol and the product contained none. The label was the violation. The deaths were not. The statute kept growing by increments, each one attached to an incident. The 1958 Food Additives Amendment introduced the requirement that additives be shown safe before use, along with the Delaney Clause on carcinogens. In 1959, a weed killer residue turned up on a portion of the cranberry crop weeks before Thanksgiving. The Secretary of Health said so out loud, and the market collapsed almost overnight. In 1971, a canned vichyssoise soup was linked to botulism, 1 death, and the company that made it did not survive the recall. Those cases taught regulators something that still shapes practice. The announcement itself is a powerful instrument, and using it carries consequences in both directions. Now, 1993, back to that Seattle outbreak. 4 children died and hundreds fell ill, many of them from undercooked patties served at a fast food chain, and the regulatory consequences were enormous. In 1994, USDA declared E. coli 0157, H7 an adulterant in raw ground beef, meaning its mere presence made the product legally unsellable, a position the industry fought in court and lost. Then came the Pathogen Reduction and HACCP rule, finalized in 1996, phasing and hazard analysis and critical control points across meat and poultry plants. HACCP flipped the logic of inspection. Instead of an inspector eyeballing carcasses, plants had to identify where hazards could enter and prove, with records, that they were controlling them. Cooking temperature guidance for ground beef in food service was also revised upward in the wake of that outbreak. The safe handling instructions panel, the little box on raw meat telling you to keep it separate and cook it thoroughly, came out of the same period. Before that, the 80s had already delivered two warnings that people forget. In 1985, a Mexican-style soft cheese made in California was linked to a listeria outbreak with dozens of deaths, many of them unborn or newborn, and it is the reason pregnancy advice about soft cheese exists at all. That same year, a dairy plant near Chicago was tied to a salmonella outbreak in pasteurized milk, with confirmed cases in the thousands. A reminder that a kill step protects nothing if product can be recontaminated after it. 2006. Fresh spinach, bagged, triple washed, the healthy choice. An E. coli O157H7 outbreak was traced to spinach from California's Salinas Valley, with the FDA advising consumers nationwide not to eat fresh bagged spinach. Roughly 200 illnesses across 26 states and 3 deaths were reported. Investigators traced the strain to a cattle ranch environment near the growing fields, including feral swine. The industry response was the California Leafy Greens Marketing Agreement, a metrics-based program with buffer zones from animal operations and water testing requirements. 2008, and now we're back to the Peanut Corporation of America, but this time the legal end of it. Federal prosecutors brought charges, and in 2014 a jury in Albany, Georgia convicted former Chief Executive Stuart Parnell on multiple counts including conspiracy and fraud. In September 2015, he was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, his brother Michael to 20 years, and a quality assurance manager, Mary Wilkerson, to 5. It is widely described as the harshest sentence ever handed down in an American food safety case. The evidence at trial centered on internal emails and certificates of analysis, documents showing products shipped after positive results. The charges were fraud charges, not food safety charges, which tells you something about where the law actually had teeth. 2008 also gave the world the infant formula crisis in China, where melamine was added to diluted milk to fool protein tests. Chinese authorities reported roughly 300,000 infants affected and 6 deaths. It reshaped global testing for economically motivated adulteration. The same compound had already surfaced a year earlier in imported pet food ingredients sold in North America, and almost nobody connected the two at the time. Same year in Canada, a Maple Leaf Foods plant in Toronto was linked to a Listeria monocytogenes outbreak in deli meats. 22 deaths were confirmed. The company's chief executive, Michael McCain, went in front of cameras and took responsibility publicly rather than routing everything through lawyers, and that response is still taught in crisis management courses. 2010 brought a recall of roughly 500 million shell eggs from 2 linked Iowa operations after a Salmonella enteritidis outbreak, and it landed just as a federal egg safety rule was phasing in. 2011, cantaloupes from Jensen Farms in Holly, Colorado, contaminated with Listeria. The CDC counted 147 illnesses and 33 deaths, plus a miscarriage. FDA's investigation pointed to a change in the packing shed, including equipment previously used for potatoes and a lack of a pre-cooling step. Melons are field-grown, netted skin, and eaten raw. The Jensen brothers pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges under the Responsible Corporate Officer Doctrine. And 2011 is also when FSMA passed, signed in January, shifting the entire American framework from reacting to contamination toward preventing it, with produced safety standards, preventive controls, and foreign supplier verification. It also gave FDA mandatory recall authority for the first time, which surprises people who assume the agency always had it. That last piece matters more every year, as more of the pantry crosses an ocean before it reaches your shelf. The scars kept accumulating after that too. A frozen dessert company shut down its plants in 2015 over Listeria, and romaine lettuce grown in a winter production region drove multi-state E. coli outbreaks later in the decade. The map is still being drawn. All right, practical section. How do you read a package the way somebody who does this for a living reads it? Brand agnostic, no accusations, just method. Rule 1. Find the lot code before you find the price. On cans it's usually embossed or laser etched on the bottom or the lid rim. On flexible pouches it's inkjetted near the seal. On glass jars it's on the shoulder or the lid. On meat it's the pack date plus the establishment number. That establishment number is your single best tool on animal products in the United States. Under USDA inspection, the mark of inspection carries a number, often written as EST followed by digits for meat, or a P number for poultry. When a recall notice is published, it names the establishment number. That's how you know whether the sausage in your freezer came from that specific plant, no matter what brand name is on the front. On egg cartons, you'll often find a plant code and a 3-digit Julian date, 1 through 365, which is the day of the year the eggs were packed. Rule 2. Read the ingredient list backwards. Ingredients are listed by weight descending. Most people read the first 3 and stop. The interesting information is at the tail. The preservatives, the acidity regulators, the stabilizers. Sodium nitrite in cured meat tells you it's a cure-dependent product. Calcium propionate in bread tells you mold is the enemy. Potassium sorbate and sodium benzoate together in a sauce tells you it's water-rich and needs both a mold and a yeast defense. Citric acid or vinegar high on the list of a shelf-stable jar usually means the safety plan is acidity, holding the product below the pH where the botulism organism can grow. Those tail ingredients tell you what the manufacturer is afraid of, which tells you how the product fails. Rule 2.5. Since we're in the ingredient panel, undeclared allergens are, year after year, among the leading reasons food is recalled in the United States, more often than any single microorganism. Usually it's a label error, a packaging line running the wrong film, or a supplier changing a formula quietly. The contained statement is regulated. The may contain or processed in a facility statement is voluntary, which means its absence proves nothing. Rule 3. Learn the phrase ready to eat. That's a legal category and it changes everything. Ready to eat means no kill step happens between the plant and your mouth. Deli meat, smoked salmon, soft cheese, pre-cut fruit, packaged salad. There's no cooking to save you, so every hazard has to be controlled upstream. That's why Listeria monocytogenes dominates ready-to-eat recalls. It's the organism that grows at refrigerator temperature, slowly, in cold, wet places, in floor drains and slicer housings. That's also why so many recall notices mention environmental sampling. Rule 4. Distinguish between the 4 date phrases. Sell by is inventory management for the store. Best if used by is peak quality. Use by is the manufacturer's outer limit for quality, and only on infant formula is it a legal safety line. Freeze by means exactly what it says. None of these are a magic clock, but on ready-to-eat refrigerated products, treat the date with much more respect than you would on a can, because the hazard profile is completely different. And read the storage instruction next to the date, because keep refrigerated and keep frozen are not decoration. A product designed to be held frozen may have no barrier at all against slow growth at fridge temperature. Rule 5. Look for what the package doesn't claim. Words like natural, farm fresh, artisan, premium, and homestyle carry little or no regulatory definition in most jurisdictions. Words that do carry definitions are worth your attention. Organic under the USDA National Organic Program. Pasteurized, Grade A, wild-caught versus farm raised on seafood under country of origin labeling. And the standards of identity that define what can legally be called mayonnaise, or chocolate, or fruit juice. When a product avoids a defined word and uses an undefined one instead, that's information. Rule 6. Check the country of origin, and on imported goods, look for an importer of record on the label. FSMA's Foreign Supplier Verification Program puts the legal duty on the importer to verify the foreign supplier's controls. If you can't tell who imported it, you can't tell who is accountable. The company prefix inside the barcode identifies the brand owner, not the factory, which is why 2 very different products can share a prefix. Rule 6.5. Inspect the container itself. A can that bulges, hisses on opening, spurts, or has a deep dent across a seam is a can you don't taste to check. Seam damage is a seal question, and the seal is the entire preservation system. Same logic for a vacuum pack that's gone slack or a jar whose safety button is already down when you buy it. Rule 7. And this is the one that actually protects you. Build a 5-minute recall habit. FDA and USDA both publish recall notices publicly and both offer email alerts. Once a week, glance at the list. Search the establishment number or the brand. It costs nothing and it turns a passive pantry into a monitored one. Learn the 3 classes while you're there. Class 1 means reasonable probability of serious health consequences or death. Class 2 means temporary or reversible effects. Class 3 means a violation unlikely to cause harm, often a labeling technicality. A market withdrawal isn't a recall at all. And Rule 8, the mental one. When you see a recall for a brand you like, resist the 2 easy reactions. The first is panic, throwing out everything remotely related. The second is dismissal, assuming it's fine because you've eaten it for years. Neither is reading. Reading is what class, what lot, what dates, what establishment, what hazard. 5 questions. Every recall notice answers all 5, in plain language, usually in under 300 words, and it will also tell you what to do with the product and what number to call. Most people never open one. Now, here's the strange part. Not every famous recall is about germs. Some of the biggest ones in history are about identity, about food not being what the label says it is at all, and those cases reveal something that a pathogen never can. How far a supply chain can drift from the truth before anyone notices. January 2013. The Food Safety Authority of Ireland announced results of a DNA survey of beef burgers sold in Irish and British supermarkets. Some samples contained equine DNA. One frozen burger product was reported at roughly 29% horse relative to beef content. The scandal spread across Europe within weeks. Products were withdrawn in the United Kingdom, France, Sweden, the Netherlands, and beyond. Lasagna, meatballs, chili, bolognese sauces, school and hospital catering supplies. Investigators traced tangled chains of traders and cold stores across multiple countries, with meat crossing several borders and changing hands repeatedly before reaching the factories that made the finished meals. Frozen blocks of trimmings are close to anonymous once they leave the boning hall. They look like frozen blocks of trimmings, and by the 3rd or 4th intermediary, the only identity left is the one written on the box. What made it strange wasn't danger. Horse meat is legally eaten in several European countries, and there was no general finding that the products were unsafe to eat, though a separate concern arose about the veterinary medicine phenylbutazone in horses not raised for food. What made it strange was that Europe had, on paper, one of the most rigorous traceability regimes on Earth, built after the BSE crisis specifically so that every animal could be followed, and the fraud walked straight through it. Because traceability systems verify documents, they ask, does this pallet have paperwork? They don't automatically ask, is the paperwork true? Nobody was routinely running species tests on beef because nobody had a reason to suspect the beef wasn't beef. The aftermath was structural. The UK commissioned an independent review by Professor Chris Elliott of Queen's University Belfast, published in 2014, which recommended a national food crime unit and argued that consumer safety should come ahead of commercial pressure at every step. The Food Standards Agency's National Food Crime Unit was established the following year. Across the EU, coordinated testing programs and the food fraud network expanded, and Interpol and Europol scaled up their annual joint operation, seizing counterfeit and substandard food and drink by the thousands of tons. The phrase, economically motivated adulteration, moved from an academic term to a category regulators budget for. And once you start looking, you find the pattern everywhere. The 2008 melamine case in China was the same logic. A test measured nitrogen as a proxy for protein, so an adulterant rich in nitrogen fooled the test. In 2005 in the UK, an industrial dye not permitted in food turned up in a chili powder used in a Worcestershire sauce, which was then used in hundreds of finished products, and the withdrawal list ran past 500 items from one ingredient several layers down. In 2015, undeclared peanut protein was found in imported cumin, which meant an allergen recall reached spice blends, seasoned meats and snack foods that no one would have thought to check. Honey, olive oil, fish species substitution, all have documented histories of adulteration precisely because the buyer's test is narrow and the seller knows exactly what the test looks for. Large-scale DNA sampling of seafood at retail and restaurants has repeatedly found mislabeling in a substantial share of samples, usually a cheaper species wearing a more expensive name. And the worst versions of this stop being about money and start being about harm. In Spain in 1981, industrial rapeseed oil that had been denatured for non-food use was refined and sold as cooking oil. Hundreds died and thousands were left with lasting illness. That case is the reason people in the fraud world say adulteration is a safety issue with a delay built in. Here's a second strange case, in a completely different direction. February 2008, the Westland Hallmark Meat Company in Chino, California became the subject of the largest beef recall in United States history at the time, approximately 143 million pounds. It followed undercover video from the Humane Society of the United States showing handling of non-ambulatory cattle at the plant. The recall's staggering size came from a technicality of coverage. Because the plant's compliance failures went back 2 years, USDA recalled 2 years of production. Much of that meat had gone to federal nutrition programs, including school lunch. And here's the part people forget: most of it had already been eaten. There were no confirmed illnesses linked to it. The recall was a legal and procedural act, not an emergency medical one. The company closed within weeks anyway. That's the lesson those two cases share. A recall's size in pounds tells you almost nothing about its danger. 143 million pounds with 0 confirmed illnesses versus a comparatively tiny volume of cantaloupe that killed 33 people. Headlines run on tonnage. Risk runs on hazard, exposure, and population vulnerability. And there's one more oddity worth knowing, because it changes how you interpret modern outbreak news. Whole genome sequencing arrived in routine public health work in the mid-2010s, and the CDC's PulseNet network now links illnesses by genetic fingerprint. FDA's parallel network catalogs isolates taken from plant environments and imported food, so a strain found on a drain in one facility can be matched to a patient 2 states away years later. That means outbreaks are detected that would previously have been invisible. 3 cases in Ohio, 2 in Oregon, 1 in Maine, spread over 4 months, all matching one strain. So when it feels like there are more recalls now than there used to be, part of that is genuinely better detection, not necessarily a dirtier food supply. We're seeing what was always there. So why does any of this happen? Not because people wake up wanting to poison strangers. It happens because of margins and because of where the pressure lands inside a plant. Food manufacturing runs on thin net margins compared to almost any other industry. Commodity processors often operate in low single digits. Now imagine you're the plant manager. Your costs are ingredients, labor, energy, packaging, and freight. 4 of those 5 are set by markets you don't control. The one you can squeeze is labor, and inside labor, the easiest line to trim is the one that produces no visible output: sanitation, quality assurance, environmental testing, maintenance. That's the whole economics of food safety in a sentence. Safety spending has no revenue line. It shows up on the profit and loss statement as pure cost every single week. And the benefit is an absence, an outbreak that didn't happen, which no accountant can put in a column. So what actually changes inside a cheaper version of a product? Several things, and they're not all bad. Often the biggest difference is formulation. Cheaper spreads swap in less expensive fats. Cheaper sauces use more water and more thickener. Cheaper meat products carry higher added water or protein solution. And in the United States, meat and poultry that's been enhanced with a solution must declare it with the percentage on the label. That's a real checkable number. Cheaper juice uses concentrate. Cheaper vanilla uses vanillin. None of that is dangerous. It's the visible economics. The invisible economics is different. It's testing frequency. Does the plant swab environmental sites weekly or monthly, and how many sites? It's the hold and release policy. Does finished product wait for test results before shipping, or ship on the assumption results will be clean? That specific question, ship and pray versus test and hold, is at the center of more than one documented case. It's maintenance. Is that worn conveyor belt with the cracked surface replaced, or run one more quarter? Listeria lives in cracks, in hollow rollers, in floor drains, in the seams of equipment that was designed before anyone thought about cleanability. And it's the supplier layer. Cheap product means cheap inputs, means more brokers, more trading houses, longer chains, more borders. Every extra link is a place where a certificate of analysis can be photocopied instead of earned. The horse meat chains ran through multiple traders in multiple countries. That wasn't an accident of geography. That's what buying on price alone builds. There's a second economic force nobody talks about: recall cost asymmetry. A large recall is genuinely brutal. Published estimates of average direct recall cost to a food company have run into the tens of millions of dollars before litigation, before lost shelf space, and shelf space is the killer. When a retailer clears your product, a competitor takes the slot, and you may never get it back. Bluebell Creameries shut down all production and pulled all products in April 2015 after a listeria outbreak linked to 10 illnesses and 3 deaths in Kansas. The company later reached agreements with the Department of Justice, and in 2020 pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges and agreed to criminal penalties and a civil settlement totaling in the range of $19 million. In 2023, its former president was sentenced after a plea related to the handling of that episode. That's the modern picture. Recalls are no longer purely commercial events. So you'd think the incentives are aligned, and mostly they are. The failures happen at the scene, where a small operator with no reserves faces a positive test result on a Friday afternoon with a truck already loaded. That's the moment. Nobody plans for it. The good plants have a written answer already. Product doesn't move. What does this mean for you at the shelf? Honestly, not what you'd expect. Price is a weak proxy for safety. Some of the worst documented failures happen at suppliers feeding premium brands, and some of the cleanest operations are enormous, boring, high-volume plants where the process is so automated and so heavily instrumented that human variability barely enters. Scale can be a safety asset. The better proxy is process, not price. Foods with a real verifiable kill step in the package. Retort canned goods, commercially sterile products, properly pasteurized shelf-stable items. And foods with a kill step in your kitchen, meaning things you cook thoroughly. Those two categories carry the least residual risk, regardless of what they cost. Let's land this where it's useful. Your shelves, your freezer, your actual week. Start with the hierarchy of risk, because it lets you spend attention where it counts. The lowest risk foods in your house are commercially sterile, properly processed canned goods, retort pouches, shelf-stable heat-treated products. They've been through a defined thermal process designed to destroy Clostridium botulinum spores in low-acid foods. That process is regulated in the United States under the low-acid canned food rules, and processors have to register and file their scheduled processes. That's why a can of beans is one of the most reliably safe objects in your kitchen. What you watch for on cans is physical integrity. Deep dents on a seam, bulging ends, active leaking, or a can that hisses and sprays when opened. Those go in the trash, unopened if possible, no tasting, no debate. Next tier, dry staples. Rice, pasta, flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, oats. These are low water activity, so pathogens don't multiply, but flour deserves a specific mention. Raw flour has been linked to documented E. coli outbreaks in North America, including a large multi-state recall of General Mills flour in 2016 and further flour-related outbreaks since. Wheat is a field crop. Milling is not a kill step. And that's exactly why the advice about not eating raw dough stopped being about eggs. Highest attention tier, refrigerated ready to eat. Deli meats, soft cheeses, smoked fish, pre-cut melon, packaged salads, refrigerated dips. No kill step ahead of you. Buy smaller quantities more often. Keep the fridge at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius, and use a thermometer because domestic fridge dials lie routinely. Now storage, and here's where prepper wisdom and food science agree completely. The 3 enemies of stored food are heat, oxygen, and light, in that order. Every 10 degrees Celsius warmer roughly doubles the rate of chemical degradation. So a cool, dark interior closet beats a garage, and a garage in a hot climate can cut usable shelf life of canned goods by more than half through quality loss, not sterility loss. On real shelf life, be honest with yourself. Salt and sugar keep essentially indefinitely if dry. White rice properly stored keeps for many years. Brown rice does not because the bran layer contains oil that goes rancid, typically inside a year at room temperature. Cooking oils oxidize. Unopened, most are good roughly a year to 18 months, less if they sit warm. Canned high-acid foods, tomatoes, citrus, pineapple, degrade faster in quality than low-acid ones, often noticeably by 18 months. Low-acid canned vegetables and meats stay palatable for years past their printed date if stored cool, and the can is intact. Home canning is a different discipline entirely. If you do it, follow current tested recipes from a recognized extension service, and never improvise processing times on low-acid foods. Rotation is the whole game. First in, first out physically. Date the top of each can with a marker the day it comes home, not the best by date, the purchase date. It takes 2 seconds and it makes the shelf readable at a glance. Build a recall habit into that system. Keep a small note, digital or paper, of the brands and lot codes of anything you buy in bulk. 12 cans, a case of formula, a flat of anything. It sounds obsessive. It takes about 90 seconds per bulk purchase, and it converts you from someone who hears about a recall on the news and shrugs into someone who can answer the question in under a minute. And 2 habits that outperform everything else. First, a probe thermometer and actually using it. Poultry to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius, ground meats to 160, 71. That single tool removes most of the residual risk in a normal kitchen. Second, cross-contamination discipline. Separate boards, wash hands after raw protein. Never rinse raw poultry in the sink because splash spreads bacteria across the counter. Here's the truth about all of this. You cannot inspect your way to safety at the shelf. You can't see listeria. You can't smell salmonella. What you can do is stack the odds. Favor foods with a real kill step. Keep the risky tier small and fresh. Store cool and dark. Rotate ruthlessly. Keep your codes and check the public recall lists that already exist and cost you nothing. That's not paranoia. That's just reading the receipt the industry already prints for you. Here's what stays with me after going through all of it. Almost none of these cases were caused by a monster. They were caused by a decision made on an ordinary afternoon by a tired person with a loaded truck and a bad test result, and by systems that made that decision easier than it should have been. And nearly every protection you now enjoy, the inspection stamps, the allergen declarations, the preventive controls, exists because somebody's family paid for it first. That's worth remembering the next time a label seems like bureaucratic clutter. It's a record of what went wrong before you got here. If this was useful, subscribe, because we go label by label, category by category, always from documented sources. And tell me in the comments which subject you want next: honey adulteration, olive oil grading, canned tuna, or infant formula. Whichever gets the most votes, that's the next one I write.